Nice.
you know, has more. Or maybe, like I said, maybe it's just adjacent. I think it would just be helpful, but anyway, I thought of that as soon as you mentioned that, I was like, oh, well.
This book is what, you know,
All right, my obedient people, you have 2 minutes to be in your chair. And we're gonna be kind of sitting in a way you can see Jim presenting, so I don't know where you want it. You can move all the way down here. And then for the conversation, we'll swing back out to our spots. I think we're okay.
so,
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
how do you do that?
I think this is better than-
Community,
No, you're good.
no, I'm just, no, I'm just, and
Yeah.
the
Now, if I speak like this, can you hear me on the Zoom?
whole way of.
Should I be just a little louder, or was that okay?
In our-
Okay.
That was fine.
Thank
you. Whatever.
Kathy Maxwell gave the A-OK, which I think is like the height, you know?
Development.
Be careful what.
I know. As soon as I did that, I thought, oh, wait, I'm not sure what this means.
I
Use
do
my audio.
thumbs all the time.
It's another piece of your analogy.
Ever since I was in Italy and found out that this is actually an obscene gesture. So it's been thumbs up ever since.
I hate thumbs up because it seems like
Oh, that guy.
that guy.
Yeah, that.
But yeah, I guess I point,
What guy?
you know, the guy who always gives thumbs up. I don't want to
Oh,
say.
the general guy.
No.
In general. President.
Oh.
Like, here's my shall not be named. They ruined my all red.
I got 2 people like that.
Yeah,
Then wear that again.
okay. I mean, I'm picturing, like, isn't Buddy Christ the?
That's a pretty good one. Yeah,
I do
that's a
not
good
know
one.
that.
He's pointing
But
and he's
it's-
also
it's-
winking.
Is it a thumbs up?
I think it's a thumb. I think he's like,
Oh, I thought it was like the finger down.
Oh, maybe it is, maybe it is.
I think he's doing something different with it. So we're missing Tom and Chuck.
I saw Tom at the lobby entrance when I came in, when he was rehearsing.
Oh, is he on? Not today. Unless he is tonight. We should mess with him again. So he's still there.
I just needed something.
That's the stuff of nightmares
forgot my
right there.
Yeah.
Like I've had that nightmare before.
So it also makes noise when I.
I think
play it,
teachers
which
have
is
it.
fine if I'm, like, you're not
Show up to
in
class
the
and,
room.
oh, I'm
Or
teaching
like
today.
in a room where like. lots of
Oh, I had
people
that. I
Yeah,
had
the
that.
nightmare.
Team teaching. Oh my gosh.
One person, like,
Or
Yeah.
I did the reading for Thursday. I'm supposed to be lecturing on Tuesdays. Oh, dang. How did I do that?
Oh, I actually really like this because I can doodle and then just erase it. Which I was doing.
There's somebody. Like the,
So you guys maybe have already said this, but
Is that really the only
do we all
people
need
that
to
are
be in front of?
We have, I mean, this is the first time we've told, so we haven't put it out.
I know we had talked about it. Do you want us all in front of you?
I don't care where you.
Yeah. probably.
I think it probably, I would. Though you do have no preference. If I were the storyteller, I would want to see the people. I wouldn't want somebody behind me, but.
I like the backstage view. I'm more comfortable with that
Oh,
one.
yeah,
Pointing
yeah.
around.
I feel kind of close. Then I should have you doing the cues if he gets stuck, because it's probably,
I'm not a stage manager, so.
it's in your wheelhouse more than mine, probably. I want to feel like I'm in the background. Chuck, we're just for the storytelling, we're gonna be like this way.
Lutherans, Methodists, Catholics, 30.
Listen, I sit in the back and I'm very attentive.
So does that mean I need to be sitting on somebody's lap over here?
No, you need to choose one of these chairs that we moved over here. and sit right far there.
Oh, okay, I wasn't sure what that meant.
And then we'll move over there when it's time for conversation.
So I'm afraid if this throws a wrench into things, but why is it looks like Jim's telling is favoring us rather than those present in the room?
We are able to move and
We can't move you.
we can't move you. It's thought through.
Okay, great.
It might not be
Don't
this
worry,
way for
man.
everyone. He's sitting, so it works well for him. But there's
a lot
who are back behind.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sitting in an audience with.
Thank you. I feel better.
Good.
Here, I'll go
And we
over-
want him to see you,
I'll go over
and
here
the
and
screen
make
is
it.
stationary. We can't move the screen.
Nice.
Can't see
Thank you.
me
Great.
laughing or rolling my eyes in the back of my head. That's the only problem.
Don't worry, Chad, I'm coming
Buddy
over
Price
to
is
the next view.
pointing and thumbs up, Megan. Buddy Price is pointing
like, hey, you.
It's
thumbs
both,
up.
right? It's
Thanks,
the point,
Richard.
it's
Thanks,
the
Richard. I'm
point.
like, yeah, you. Yeah, you.
And,
So, yeah.
and to keep me from evolving into a fundamentalist preacher condemning half of the human race, I have to sit down. You understand what I mean?
I
We
thought.
make our choices.
Okay. Well, I've made mine.
All right, we're gonna stop the banter and start the session. And so Jim wants to say a few words before he begins. And I think everyone who was in the room this morning is here, right?
Mhm.
Just so we don't have somebody walking in during it. Good. So we'll listen to the story, and then we're gonna reconfigure the room for the conversation while you have that time to reflect in silence. And you're on.
Today, I've chosen the translation from the Paul Seminar of the Westar Institute. It's quite different from many other translations that I looked at. There's a few keywords just to pay attention to. Their goal was to look at the authentic letters of Paul, but even within those letters they deemed authentic, they went through and looked for other kinds of scribal additions later and tried to boil those letters down to what they felt was Paul's more authentic writing. And things like the gospel is God's world-changing news. Let's see, there's a couple of them here. Instead of Christos, they're using anointed or God's anointed, the Jesus. So they translate a few things. And then pistis is translated confidence in God or confident faith in God. Admittedly, this is very nerve-wracking. And so if I seem a little out of sorts, it's true. Don't worry about that. But let's see what we can do. And we're all friends here. Many of you I've known for a long time and are dear to me. So be calm.
It's about 18 minutes. Give him your energy and attention both on the screen and in the room. And we understand 2 chapters of Paul may require prompting. And so that's like permission that's given right up front.
I asked for it. So.
But fully.
Paul, slave of God's anointed Jesus, summoned as an envoy, appointed to announce God's world-changing news, which was anticipated by the prophets in Holy Scripture. Now, I'm just assuming you can hear me well enough. Is that okay? This news is about the Son of God, who was physically descended from David, appointed and empowered as Son of God in accordance with the spirit of holiness from the time of his resurrection from the dead, Jesus, the anointed, our Lord. Through him, I've received the gracious favor of my calling to promote in his name the don't tell me, to promote in his name the obedience that comes from a confident reliance on God among all the world's nations. You yourselves are among those who are called because you belong to Jesus, the anointed. I'm writing this to all of God's beloved in Rome, called to be God's own people. May gracious favor and peace from God, our great benefactor, and our Lord Jesus, the anointed, be with you all. Well, first of all, through Jesus, the anointed, I thank God for all of you because your confident trust is being proclaimed, actually broadcast throughout the world. See, I like to change the verbs from time to time. Broadcast throughout the world. God is my witness, whom I serve wholeheartedly by spreading God's world-changing news of the Son of God, that I always mention you when I pray, imploring that now at last I may succeed in coming to you, God willing. I am longing to see you, to visit you, to see you, so that I may share some inspiring benefit that will strengthen you.
Or,
Hmm?
or to put it more
Yeah. Oh, I was just trying to say, don't tell me. Or to put it more pertinently, that when we come together, we might be mutually encouraged by each other's confident trust in God, both yours and mine. Now, I think you ought to know, my friends, how often I've planned to come to you, but have been prevented until now, in hope that I might work as fruitfully among you as in the rest of the world. By virtue of my calling, I'm under obligation to both Greeks and barbarians, to both the wise and foolish. That's why I'm eager to proclaim God's world-changing news also to you in Rome. I'm not embarrassed by this news because it has the power to transform those who are persuaded by it, first Jews and then Greeks. God's character is shown by this news to be trustworthy. And that leads to having confidence in God. Just as it stands written, the one who decides to live on the basis of confidence in God is the one who gets it right. Now, there's a translation for you. Am I allowed to say stuff like that?
Apparently.
Now, at the same time, heaven's just indignation is being shown against all disregard of God and God's justice. On the part of those who are trying to repress the truth of God, about God by their wrongdoing. Indeed, what can be known about God is all around, for God has made it clear to them. Indeed, God's invisible qualities, right? Eternal power, divine nature, these can be visibly apprehended ever since the creation through the things God has made. As a result, they have no excuse. Even though they knew about God, they failed to honor or give God what God is due. Instead, their thinking became warped. Their muddled minds grew clouded. They portrayed themselves as enlightened, but became fools. They traded the majesty of the immortal God for limitations, a likeness of a mortal man, as well as birds, cattle, and reptiles. So, God handed them over in their cravings for self-destructive behavior, so that they degraded their bodies against themselves. They traded the truth about God for a lie. They honored, they adored and were devoted to the creature instead of the Creator, who is praised forever. Amen. Amen. I need an amen.
Amen.
I can't go on without an amen. For this reason, God handed them over to disgraceful passions. Their women traded natural sexual relations for what is unnatural. In the same way, the men exchanged natural sexual relations with women and became, became inflamed with desire for each other. Men engaged with shameless acts with men and paying the price for it for the error personally, paying the price personally for it for the error of their ways. Now, since they also did not see fit to recognize God, God handed them over to an unfit mind to do what is not fitting. They became preoccupied with all kinds of injustice, immorality, greediness, depravity. They are consumed with jealousy, murder, strife, deceit, and spite. They have become gossips and slanderers, despisers of God. They are haughty, arrogant, pretentious. They invent evil schemes, and they rebel against their parents. They are thoughtless. No, it's senseless, actually. Well, thoughtless too, but senseless, faithless, heartless, and merciless. Although they know full well God's judgment that those who do such things deserve to die, they not only do these evil deeds themselves, but they even supported others who do. The bottom line is, all you who judge, you have no defense. For when you judge others, you condemn yourself. For you do the very things that you condemn. Now, we all know that God judges rightly those who do such evil deeds. No? What's the first word? Do. The next one, too.
Do you suppose?
Oh, do you suppose? Thank you. Do you suppose any of you who judge those who do such things, even while you are doing the same things, that you will escape God's judgment? Do you? No. Do you so belittle God's wealth of generosity, restraint, and patience that you are unaware that the point of God's goodness is to get you to turn your life around? But actually, because of your stony and stubborn hearts, you're compounding the consequences for yourselves. That will come due on the day of God's just indignation, when divine judgment will be made clear. And God will pay back each person according to what each person has done. For those who, by persisting in doing the right thing, they strive for praise, honor, immortality, what they get is a glorious life. But for those who, from self-serving ambition, reject the truth and embrace wrongdoing, what they get is furious anger. For there will be distress and anguish for every single human being who does evil. First the Jew, and then the Greek. But there will be praise, honor, and peace for everyone who does what is good. First the Jew, and then the Greek. For God has no favorite people. For all those who are ignorant of the law of Moses, right? Ignorant of the law of Moses, who are guilty of doing wrong, of wrongdoing, they will perish despite their ignorance of the law. All those who know the law of Moses will be condemned by the law. For those who have received the law of Moses are not the ones approved by God, but those who do what it says. Now, when nations who do not have access to the law of Moses, but they do naturally what the law requires, they embody the law in themselves, even though they do not possess the law. They demonstrate that the values engraved in the law of Moses are what? Written on their hearts. This is confirmed by the witness of their conscience and by their habit of debating amongst themselves what is right and what is wrong. And this will all become clear when God exposes what is hidden of the human condition through the anointed Jesus, as I understand God's world-changing news. I have the next line. Now, as for you now, you call yourself a Jew, and you rest your hopes on the law of Moses, and you boast about your relation with God. Since you are trained in the law, you claim to know God's will and to discern what really matters. You're convinced that you are a guide for the blind, a light for those in darkness, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of the young. You appear to embody the knowledge and truth that are in the law. So, when you are teaching others, do you learn anything yourself? When you rant against stealing, are you yourself a thief? When you speak out against adultery, are you an adulterer? As someone who detests idols, have you made an idol, listen, of your own religion? You boast about the law. Do you then dishonor God by breaking the law? You see, it's just as it stands written. Because of you, God's name is held in contempt among the peoples of the world. Hold on, there's a little more. Now comes the fun part. Now, it is the case that circumcision is indeed valuable, provided that you adhere to the law. But if someone who is uncircumcised, oh no, wait, I forgot a line. It's indeed valuable, and provided you adhere to the law. But if you are a lawbreaker who happens to be circumcised, then you've become like someone uncircumcised. Suppose someone uncircumcised practices the virtues required by the law. Won't his being uncircumcised count the same as if he were circumcised? As a result, someone remaining uncircumcised who lives by the law stands in judgment on you, the lawbreaker, who has the written tradition and is circumcised. To be a Jew, after all, is not just to be one in public, nor is circumcision just something that's external or physical. To be a Jew is rather to be one inwardly. And true circumcision is a matter of the heart, transformed by God, not conformed to tradition. Such a person gets praise, not by mortals, but by God. The gospel story.
Jason, can you make sure there's nobody in the waiting room waiting to get in? Let's reconfigure and we'll have a conversation in the circle. And everybody let's just guard some silence and formulate your experience.
Or why don't I just stay right? Yeah, I'll just stay.
Yeah, that's good for everyone. So, you nailed it.
This is what my script looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah, can mark it all up.
That was 60 verses, and it's the most demanding thing I've ever learned in 30 years of doing this. On one hand, I'm thankful, and on the other hand, I'm chastising myself for saying yes. So what did you hear? What did you experience?
Let's do brief responses. So no big speeches, just kind of first responses, and then we'll let it out of that conversation. We can move into something a little more.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I think Paul is confused as to his audience.
Right.
I mean, I kept having to shift who I was listening to it to make any sense. I could, if it was addressed at me, I didn't like it.
Right, just go. Okay. I thought it was interesting as you told it straight through. Gave me a different impression than when you made the comments. If I was a radical fundamentalist standing up beating on the public, I think that some people are really bad, as opposed to other people who are not so bad. This was the implication. And when you read it through, you basically see that everybody's in big trouble. And so the people who think they're in pretty good shape really are not. And that seems to be the driver of the argument, as opposed to some of you are nice religious people, and some of you are on the outside. And I'm closing up with the nice religious people. I think he starts off by saying we're all in big trouble.
He starts off by saying what? What was your last sentence, Chuck?
We all are in big trouble. Everybody's an idolater. Everybody breaks. You know, we don't treat other people the way we want to be treated. So none of us stand in a position better than anybody else. But I think you got to get that by reading the whole thing from top to bottom, like he did, to see where he's going with it, and probably gets there even more in the next chapter. But
Richard?
I was struck by the way Paul begins this us-them discussion, because, of course, Romans does a whole lot of dancing with the line between people who are Torah observant and people who are not. But he begins by dividing the world into Greeks and barbarians. And the second cut is between those who are wise and those who are no minds. And it means that this us-them piece is complicated from the start, because if the audience is majority Gentile, Paul is a barbarian to them. And I'm wondering what that means.
Jim.
Oh, I just wanted to, so I'm doing chapter 3, 1 through something. Anyway, I just wanted to jump right in because I couldn't help not hearing chapter 3 as you were, building, as you were telling what you did. But it just gave a lot of background.
Mark?
Yeah, I've always read Romans as a sort of a stern lecture, and at least the way that you performed it here was much more inviting. I mean, he's still blasting people left and right, but it was a more ironic or more inviting way of hearing it than simply being lectured at.
One of the things that I appreciated during the Paul seminar was they said these first 2 chapters are like a classical diatribe in terms of it's trying to get us to think with a new perspective about the world situation. And it's really just laying the groundwork for what comes later not necessarily condemning the world or, I mean, it's just naming some truths. And so I tried to keep it in a tone of an invitation and an inquiry rather than a condemnation and an accusation. I don't know if I got there or not, but that was my goal.
That came through well, I thought.
Thank you.
Jenna.
Yeah, so going along with what Richard was saying, I heard that piece of kind of blurring groupings. And then the part where you very logically laid out the circumcision, obedience, disobedience, circumcision, blurring the lines as well of, yeah, but wait, that was a sign of the in-group, now it's not working. So, yeah, I felt like the whole thing was just making a hash out of all groupings.
Well, it was like learning a hash. It was.
Kathy?
Yeah, thank you, Jim. I appreciated the focus on embodiment throughout, especially
Yes.
because chapter 2 ends with the whole sort of circumcised, uncircumcised back and forthness. And that kind of emphasized to me the what it really means, what Paul's saying it really means to embody the ways of God. I also typically at least teach Romans 1 as the last part of Romans 1 as riling up the Jews so that they're, shaking their fists, those dirty Gentiles, and then flipping the script on them as chapter 2 begins. But that requires, I think, a lot more aggressive Paul. And so I appreciated your more, as you said, more inviting Paul. And I would have to say that I think with your performance, I wonder if I wish I would like, there are lots of people that I wish could hear that, those 2 chapters that seemed quite relevant, especially the way that you presented it today. So thank you for that.
Thank you. That's kind.
I'll just agree with what you're saying, Kathy. What I heard was the engagement of the listeners, as both the Jew and the righteous Gentile. On the one hand, first judging them, these various perversions, and then finding that I was also judged. There was no us and them, that we're all in the same boat. And that what I would call a rhetoric of implication of all.
Pam?
Yeah, I just want to make sure to first of all express real appreciation, Jim, to your for your learning those 60 verses, if you will, and giving them all to us here. I'm still struggling with my portion that I'll get to deal with a little bit later today. And I also wanted to echo Mark was putting into words some of the things I was thinking of in terms of your more invitational. And I like that word irenic, Mark, that the way of, it's not a stereotypical, perhaps, vision of Paul. And I like that presentation. I also enjoyed and appreciated hearing the translation that you chose, and that as we find time and time again, to hear different translations opens things up in a new way. And I'll just leave that there. That was really much appreciated.
So I think your initial question to us was, what did you hear?
Or what did you experience?
Yeah. So first of all, I appreciated the conversational style that's been mentioned in various ways. It was more engaging and pulled us in to then implicate us, right? Which is good. But the one that jumped out, which is why I wanted to get the script just to make sure I had it right, that hit me between the eyes, and Kathy maybe was mentioning about making it apply to today. Because of you, God's name is held in contempt among the peoples of the world. but holy crap, wow. I mean, there have been various people who have done the man on the street, interviews that have said like, Christian, what are the first 3 words that come to mind, and they're not love and compassion and forgiveness and, it's hypocrite and judgmental and closed-minded and, those things.
Yep.
And so, they'll know we are Christians by our love. Not so much. So that's what I really heard. Yeah.
Marty?
I too want to express my appreciation for what a job it must have been to learn this. I did just a short piece of this, and it was a trick. And I want to reinforce what a lot of other people have already said about the tone. I do think that you actually did something, and I worked with the Scholars version as well, although I didn't go straight with its translation. But I think you actually toned down their analysis of the setup at the beginning. And also the fact that you did the long stretch of it contributed towards the effect that this is actually about everybody, not just them. So that was great. That was excellent. At some point, the seminar needs to think about how we help that happen in the epic telling. Because if individual tellers are still concentrating on their pieces and doing them in traditional tones, that may not happen, even though we're doing the whole letter. Anyway, thank you. It was well done.
Thank you. For me, I had to keep it quite low because earlier in my storytelling life, I would be telling something and I noticed that the people in the first 2 or 3 rows are all leaning back because I'm like way too big. And so I have to work really, really hard to get it even as low as I got it. You don't know how restrained I was trying to make myself, even at this.
I think I have a
Well,
memory
you pulled it off.
of Herod killing the children or something like that. It's like, oh my gosh, they're gonna die.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
I'm gonna say one of my experiences was that we were not a very good audience. In that you kept having to draw out what are the natural responses an audience should be making. So it worked best when we were interacting with you, I guess is what I'm saying. And as an audience, that's not how we, well, if we were in a Black church, it would work better, right? That's what you were looking for.
Amen.
Yeah, you were looking for that kind of interaction. And it's interesting, the letter, the orality of the letter seems to assume or expect. That's what I experienced. It was expecting that, and that's therefore it worked better when we were giving that. But of course, you had to prompt us to give that. We were not doing that unprompted.
I had my vision, my picture walking into this was I'm sitting in a room at the medical intensive care unit, talking at the bed with a patient and a couple of family members. I had to get it that intimate because that's what I do that for thousands of hours all the time.
Well, and that kind of interaction doesn't have to take place in a large group. It can, but it also is very natural in a smaller setting for us to be giving you some feedback that we weren't giving you.
I'm aware of the time.
You don't need to be aware of that.
Okay.
You have to be
You gotta
loud,
yell
right?
like
Sorry.
you.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you so much. So speaking of audience, and maybe to what Joanna said earlier in terms of, I found myself shifting between, oh, I want to be a Jew this time, and then you said something that, that the Jews are doing something they shouldn't do. I'm like, oh, no, I don't want to be a Jew anymore. This is who I want to be. And so I was just like wondering how, I think part of the response was also like me trying to figure out who I am as I'm listening to you. And in places where it was say maybe like calling out the Jews, I almost wanted to be like, you're the Jew, like see how you're not, doing it right, and then things like that. So I suppose like part of my own response was also like stifled because I was like, I wasn't sure who I wanted to be. And I wanted to choose the better person in the scenario, but I really enjoyed your telling.
We have 2 hands that have been up, and that'll bring a close. So, no? Okay, then 1.
Oh gosh, I'm so sorry that this is what we're ending on.
No. Oh my goodness, what is she gonna say?
I mean, okay, so how do I say this in a way that's not like I zoned out after the natural sex bit? I hate Romans. I have no interest in listening to Paul. I don't think there's a way to save like Romans 1:27, whatever the fuck it is. So I like, and this is not your telling, this is absolutely the words. And like the way you told it was very different. I didn't feel at any point like, like there was no redeeming of like to call queer sex unnatural. There's no redeeming of that in the rest of it. So it felt very much like when a church says they're affirming and then you say you're queer and then they're like, let's get coffee. And they try to like nice talk you out of being gay, which is like not an enjoyable experience. And so I guess I'm just curious about like, if we want to be telling this text in churches, how do you not then alienate queer people in the church? Because those exist and like queer people belong in the church if they want to be in the church. And so I'm not sure if there's a way to like, I don't think there's a way to tell around it. And so I'm feeling very similar to how I did when we were telling Hosea, where it's like, I'm just like viscerally uncomfortable. And I was just like, cool, this is not for me. And like, I don't want to be here. So yeah, that's my feelings as a queer person listening to this text. But
I can tell you, I had great fear about telling that section. And I'm a member of one of only 2 reconciling in Christ congregations in my synod. And I had to, well, it was frightful. And the only I will never tell this in any other situation other than a group of people who have enough historical critical knowledge of that, what is it that we're really talking about and what to do with that. But I would never do that whole section. The only redeeming part for me was that was only a part in the middle. There was greater, as much judgment on slanders and gossips and haughty and pretentious and all those. But nobody reads those. All they do is go for the middle. So I'm with you.
All right, so we're gonna put a pin on it here. Sorry, but we can spend the rest of the time in this. And I don't think that's a bad place. It probably indicates that this is a conversation we need to have, like maybe in a Zoom, do one just dedicated to the most difficult, either to hear the whole thing again and have a conversation about it in light of the questions you're raising or not. So we're gonna hear 2 more tellings of one section of what we heard again. And I don't think we can do responses real well to people telling on a screen. Like the Black church responses are going to be difficult, but if somebody wants that, they should just let us know, because some people might be derailed in the midst of their telling if they start hearing oral responses in the middle of it. So it's kind of a teller's choice to cue us what we should do. Marty, you need to say something.
I was just going to second the suggestion that we come back later to 126 and 27.
Okay.
I think it's pretty important that we deal with that with the network before the epic telling. And I'll volunteer to go first.
All right. So people who are watching can put it on speaker view if you want to just see Marty. Marty wants to see you, so I'm not going to do it. I don't even know if I could do it. Oh, Jason is going to. No, it's mine though. Mine's the one that's on. Okay. We're going to just see Marty in the room.
Yeah.
We ready?
Yep. We're still recording, right?
Unless you stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Word of the Lord's envoy, Paul, to you, brothers and sisters in Rome, continuing on the topic of what happens to those who diss God. Thus says Paul. Because they did not reckon God worth recognition, God correspondingly handed them over to an unreckoning mind to do unfitting things, obsessed with every kind of injustice, badness, greed, evil, brimming with jealousy, murder, strife, deceit, meanness, gossipers, slanderers, godless, insolent, arrogant braggarts, plotting evil, disloyal to parents, mindless, faithless, heartless, merciless. The sort who, recognizing God's just decree that those who practice such things deserve death, not only do them, but reckon well of those who practice them. There is, therefore, no excuse for you, O person who judges, whoever you are. For when you judge the other, you condemn yourself. For you, the judge, are practicing the same things. We know that God's judgment is, in truth, against those who practice such things. So, you judge of those who practice such things. Do you reason, while you yourself are doing them, that you will escape God's judgment? Or do you presume on the richness of God's kindness and restraint and patience, not understanding that God's kindness is to bring you to a change of heart? But because of your hardness and unchanging heart, you are storing up for yourself wrath on the day of wrath and the revealing of the just judgment of God, who will pay back each one according to that one's works. To those who by patient good work seek glory and honor and escape from decay, eternal life. But to those who, through ambition, are disloyal to truth and loyal instead to injustice, wrath and fury, trouble and distress, to every human person who produces evil, Jew first, then Greek, but glory and honor and peace to anyone who produces good, Jew first, then Greek, because God does not play favorites.
I think we'll get like three quick responses so we can move and hear the other one, and then we can do the quick three responses to Kathy and then discuss does that sound good? The multiplicity that we heard. So responses, either on screen or off. And you need to raise your hand because I won't see you now if you don't. You need to electronically raise your hand.
I think it's a heck of a thing to see you look off screen.
Yeah.
So that's just a major choice that I was struck by.
I had a question about his comment that in addition to making it powerful for us in observing you when you turn, did it help you to also memorize the material? Was it a self cue as well, or was it only for our own benefit?
So here's my script. It has the Greek in one column and my English translation in the other. I astonished myself by actually sticking with my own translation. Usually other familiar stuff sneaks in, but I had to reprint this 3 times because as I worked with it, I adjusted things. I didn't add in, and I practice this stuff while I'm out walking. So it wasn't until today that I put a camera on myself and figured out exactly what I was going to do. But I was tracking with the notion that the rhetoric of that at this point it's a diatribe addressing a pretend third part, or at least a third party who's not present. And that was the best way I could figure out to signal that. Although I mean, you can feel where it's going and that it's not really just addressing a pretend third party.
Nathan?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Marty. I resonate with a couple of these different comments. So Jason's statement about looking off screen, it popped in my mind in the earlier performance as well. Like that section, Paul just comes across as, you know, telling other people they're not judging, and yet it seems he's judging. So it helped me to see that you're talking about a third party. I almost like get a mirror up there and talk it yourself is sort of what came into my mind. So thanks, it was really good.
All right, so we're gonna go to Kathy's performance now. So everybody who unmuted yourself at some point, make sure you're muted so you don't pop on the screen again. And then Kathy, when she speaks, yeah, she'll come up. She'll come up. Kathy Kulma, right?
Well, I bring myself up.
There you go. You bring yourself up.
Am I up yet?
You're up.
Because I'm not up on my screen. Let me change this so I can see. I still see Marty up. Okay.
I didn't get myself up on the screen either.
Okay.
I think it might just be how it works.
I just want the gallery if you want to see
It's your
everyone on
choice.
the screen.
Yeah, change it to
Oh, I
gallery.
had it on gallery. I was just, no, I didn't know. I said, I was only making the comment that I didn't see myself on speaker.
Oh.
So anyway, I wanted to say this because I thought about this after Jim did his telling. And I had gone through this earlier where I was standing up and telling it and really wanted to make a point of doing that. But after I listened to him, I realized that if I stood up because of my stature, I might take y'all to Black church. And I decided, when we talked about making choices, I decided to sit. And we'll see what difference it makes, if anything. And I wanted to say this also because in order to make this text fit my mouth, to fit my understanding, and to fit my sensibilities, I got a smash up of translations. I have some CEBs, some NLT, some NRSV, and I don't know what else I may have in here. I probably got some KHC in there too. But anyway, here goes. Now, since they didn't think it worthwhile to acknowledge God any longer, God abandoned them to their own foolish thinking and let them do things that they never should have done. They were filled with all injustice, with wicked behavior, with greed, with evil behavior. They were full of jealousy, murder, fighting, and deceit and malice. They are gossipers. They are slanderers and God haters. They are arrogant and boastful. They invent ways of doing evil and are rebellious against their parents. They are foolish. They are faithless. They are heartless. They are ruthless. And although they know that God's justice requires that those who do these kinds of things deserve death, they not only keep on doing them, but they encourage others to do them as well. So you think you might condemn such folks, such people, but you are no better than they are. And you are not without excuse. When you say that they are wicked and deserve to be punished, you bring condemnation on yourself. For those of you who are judging are doing the very same things yourselves. Now we know that God's judgment is based on truth. And God's judgment is against those who are doing these kinds of things. But do you believe, do you, that if you bring judgment against those who do these kinds of things while you are doing the same things yourselves, that you will somehow escape God's justice? Or do you have such little regard for the riches of God's generosity, tolerance, and patience? Do you not realize that God's kindness is intended to lead you to change your hearts and change your lives? But because you are rebellious and refuse to turn from your sins, you are storing up judgment for yourselves. But the day of judgment is coming, when God's righteous judgment will be revealed. For yes, God will repay everyone for all that they have done. On the one hand, God will give eternal life to those who persist in doing good, seeking honor and glory and the immortality that God offers. But on the other hand, God will pour out his anger and wrath on those who reject the truth and who instead live lives of wickedness. Yes, there will be trouble and there will be despair for every human being that does evil. First, for the Jew, and then also for the Gentile. But there will be honor and glory and peace for everyone who does what is good. First, for the Jew, and also for the Gentile. For God shows no favoritism.
We'll do 3 comments for Kathy, and then we'll begin the conversation about what we saw in the 2 renditions.
This is a known.
Yeah, your glasses are real reflective. What are you gonna do, hey?
Did that keep you from hearing it? No, just curious. I got new glasses and they got a reflector on it. I'm sorry.
It's all good.
There was one point in the middle there where you had like a bunch of like they da 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 they da da da, and every time you hit they, it felt very like chorusy in a really compelling way, and I don't remember which part of it.
It sounded what? I didn't hear it.
Chorusy, not in a bad way, like the repetition of like you land on they and then like the verse continued, and it like rhythmically flowed really nicely, and I was just struck by it.
Richard?
I say it every year at seminar, and I'm going to say it again. You have such an instrument. I love to listen to your work. It is just astonishing. And your choice to sit was so strong because it lets you do this and that. Oh my goodness. Kathy, you can freeze blood. You can do whatever you want, and it's really lovely. Thank you for that.
Yeah. So in a story that has repetition, we're taught that if something's repeated, it's repeated because it's meant to get our attention, and it's meant to get our attention because it's important. Well, having 3 different people tell the same story is a little different, but what that allows, among other things, is, oh, and the other thing is like, we're instructed or we're told to tell it differently, like each of the repetitions tell it differently. So that's what something like this does. It just automatically, each person is telling it different. So it's the third time we've heard this piece of the story. And I heard, the way that you told the, you condemn this, but you do the same thing, kind of thing. It made me think of the speck in your neighbor's eye, and you've got the log in your own. I don't know, there was just something about your tone, because that's a fun one to tell, it's just, it's like the image of that, like you got a whole log sticking out of your eye, I mean, it's just hilarious. And just, I don't know, there was just something about your embodiment of that brought that to mind. So thank you.
Well, I thank you for that point, because when that part, which, as I said, I had like at least three translations in there. And when I read that in there, to me, it was almost like a setup. And he says, okay, now you heard that about them, and you might be inclined to go ahead and pass some judgment on them, but hold up.
Right. Right.
You want to condemn them for doing the same thing that you're doing. So anyway.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about the three versions we saw and things that leapt out at you, and that may involve going deeper into one specifically, but the floor is open for the interaction. And we'll see, we don't necessarily commit to do provoking, but we might decide to get there in the end. Cliff.
I was gonna, I think it's always, we talk about paying attention to the emotion in a story, and you want to identify what's the primary emotion or emotions that you want to portray in your story. And I just think that's even more essential in non-narrative material like this. What is the emotion that the teller, and it's the teller that you're having to explore, not necessarily what the story might have in it. So what is the emotion that you're supposed to communicate? And in my experience with Paul, it's always a very complex emotion. And when I work with students, I'm always having to tell them it's probably not the same emotion the whole way, right? So where's that emotional rhythm? Like as you work through something at any length. And so I just think you've seen all the different tellings just drove that home even more, that you communicate so much the meaning through the emotion and through your demeanor as a teller always, but I think even more so when we're dealing with letters. And if I was to put a label or name on what we experience here, I thought that when Jim told it, the primary emotion that came through was, as we're getting, kind of the parts about the judging was almost a lament, right? There's the sorrow over what's happening, right? For me, for Marty, with the facial expressions as she's going through that kind of vice list, it was disgust was almost the primary emotion, right? And then for Kathy's, it was hurt, I guess is what, like there's a kind of sadness that results from being hurt by what has happened. And of course, it's complex, right? Those are probably all there. And that's why I think that's one of the real challenges of doing something, doing Paul's material or non-narrative material, is you really have to explore the complexity of the emotion and attend to where that emotion shifts and think about how you're going to express that.
Richard.
I have been utterly convinced by the work of Mark Nanos in terms of how one understands the rhetoric of both Galatians and Romans. Nanos argues that Nanos argues along with a great many people that you misunderstand Paul if you understand him out of his Jewish context, but you misunderstand Paul and Romans if you don't recognize that actually for both Romans and Galatians, there are Gentiles who have decided they are more Jewish than Jews. And the audience is the wannabes. In Galatians, there aren't Judaizers from outside. It's in fact the Gentile converts who are so kosher that you can't stand it. They don't understand kosher, but boy, can they do it. And it appears as Nanos reads Romans, that what Paul is doing here is addressing Gentiles who call themselves Jews. That phrase very definitely implies in the Greek that they're not Jewish, but they call themselves Jews. Years and years ago, a group of us visited the Tohono O'odham reservation in Arizona. And one of the elders spoke with us at some length and invited us to attend a ceremony, but then made it very clear that we were not welcome to imagine that we were native, because they were sick to death of wannabes coming in and becoming more Indian than the Indians. And he told us a story of the last group who was here. I have no idea if it was the last group chronologically or whatever, but the last group who was here, he said, was criticizing the people who were dancing because they weren't authentic enough. I think that's what Paul is doing here. Paul is calling out the wannabes, and that means that that list of things that people judge others for, while it's a perfectly good list, it's a sucker punch. And he's riling up the wannabes who have apparently identified true Jewishness with critiquing viciously the behaviors that of their former families. Converts are dangerous people. They frequently know better than any of the rest of us how to be Lutheran or Christian or Jewish or anything. I would love to explore this as a sucker punch, because I saw that both in what Marty did and what Kathy did, but boy, there were pieces I would love to sharpen and sharpen, because if he is setting them up to ride their judgmental horse around and then punctures their balloon, it means that this judgmental piece has a different flavor to it. There are still parts of it that I can't figure out how ever to like, but I do enjoy calling out wannabes because I appreciated being told, and don't you imagine that you're going to want to be Tohono O'odham, just saying you're not.
If I could respond to that, Richard, I had that in mind when I did it. My question is, do those sucker punches ever actually convert the target? They're great for slamming the target. And other parties can love it. And I actually heard a little bit of that in our responses to Jim's telling. All of us clearly were identifying groups that we thought needed to hear this message, and it wasn't us.
I'm kind of moving in a different direction. So I was thinking about the difference between when the person is speaking with generic or general categories and then move to the specific. And I felt like in the first two, it was general, specific, general. But with Kathy's telling, I felt like she wasn't giving us a list of categories of that first part you do. These are problematic things, but like she had witnessed them herself. The slandering and all that. And it deeply grieved her. It was specific, but we didn't know whom it was directed at. And then all of a sudden we're like, yeah, we're with you, right? You're talking to us. We're with you. We agree. This is horrible. And then all of a sudden it comes to us. And it's like, so it's concrete, and then it moves into the general critique. That's how I experience it. I don't know if that's there or not, or if I like watch the video, if I still feel that way, but it felt like the first part wasn't just general categories of problematic people, but things that Kathy had experienced in her own flesh and blood in a way that was different than when we were using, when I think the diatribe category was being used. Maybe that set up a different way of treating those categories. But that was just my take on it.
I also wonder if it's done on.
Yep.
Slightly closer. If it's done with sort of that, when a group of, and maybe this is just because I'm close enough to still school age, but like when a group of people is being yelled at, but the person doing the yelling is not like being specific, but it's like, somebody decided to draw all over the wall with blue crayon, and everyone's like, oh, well, that was Carl. Like, we know exactly who you're talking about. It has that sort of feel to it where I'm like curious about if it is that sort of unnamed call out, if like the audience, because there's like an energy to that room where like everyone's being yelled at, but you know who is being yelled at, but it's still really awkward. I feel like I think some of that might be sitting beneath this, and to like play it that way could be really interesting. If you want to do like, you could do it with like audience plants who like stare at people like, I know he's talking about you. Could be fun.
Yeah. Tom's gonna speak.
Strikes me that,
Nice and loud, Tom.
yes.
Use your dad voice.
Yeah, that's not the mic, right. Right. Strikes me that Paul's intention is to get people to stop judging one another. And rather that move toward judgment is present in both of what mean the Jew first and then the Gentile, or the Greek, as Kathy translated, which seemed, incidentally, I thought that translation of Gentile rather than Greek was helpful because it's more inclusive. We tend to hear Greek as being a national identity rather than a more universal. My observation for us as a seminar is that I'm struck by the difference between ancient and modern audiences. And how do we account for that? How do we identify what were the characteristics of ancient audiences and of modern audiences? So I found myself, as some of you probably know, United Methodist Church is about to divide itself into two denominations over significantly the way that Romans 1:27 is heard. And what I thought at the end was that I wanted all of those who are going to join the global Methodist Church because they will not tolerate the inclusion, full inclusion for ordination and marriage of gay persons. That I would like for them to hear. Then I found myself, judging them. So it's full of paradox. But one of the questions for us is how do we identify the character of ancient versus modern audience?
Joanna. Oh, you're clapping. I thought you had your hand up. My bad.
I just think from what you said, Tom, just that like an ancient audience hearing the words natural and unnatural. What is that? What does it mean to be natural in the ancient world? Men having long hair, you know what I'm saying? Like so that's, I don't know. I'm just thinking, I don't want to spend too much time necessarily on the Bible. This is a Bible bullet. It's like the main, people are putting it up to people's head and pulling the trigger, right? On this specific thing where like 3 verses later, he's like, therefore, don't do this, don't judge, right? Like he's, Paul, but like, this is a hard one. And like the ELCA did what y'all are doing like 10 years ago over this.
Not as big, not as much. It's my perception. This is really what's happening.
Yeah,
And it's big. It's, I think it's a bigger percentage than what happened with the DLC.
15.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure, but I'm with you. Joanna. Bring us a word. If you want. Are you there? Well, we'll go to Marty and then you can.
I'm not sure she heard her name. It was hard to hear. Joanne.
Sorry. Joanna. Your
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Sorry.
mine's a very simple one. Kathy Comer's presentation was the only one with where it stopped, where I actually wanted to be on the right side in all of this, instead of just saying, F off, Paul. Kathy's, the way she did it so intimately at the end made me think maybe I'd like to be on the right side. And I think certainly that was Paul's intent with it somehow. Anyway, that's all I have to say. I'll lower my hand.
Marty?
On the topic of unnatural, I do think it's worth noticing that later it is the very same phrase that's used to describe the grafting of the Gentiles onto the Jewish trunk, which Paul certainly regards as a good thing. So there's a bit of a setup going on there. Now, how you get people to hear that, especially given, I mean, it's worse when we do it in little snippets, but I just tossed that tidbit in as worth being part of our processing about the term unnatural.
Yeah.
Yeah, I put Marty's challenge in saying, asking the question of this kind of diatribe, does it have the impact of reaching minds or reaching people and convincing them to, well, in this case, be non-judgmental. And I've been thinking about that, and going back to what Tracy said, it's a gift to hear it 3 different times, 3 different ways. And if I think about my response, hearing Jim conversationally tracking and then shooting holes in any kind of argument or any kind of thought that I had an edge, or I was kind of on a roll or in a good place, and being humbled in that sense. And then you know, Marty's version, I love the way you turned the sign. I don't know what your thought was, but it was almost as if to say, this is what it looks like. This is what we look like when we do this. This is what the intolerance, the harshness looks like, and it's shocking. And then I heard Kathy's, and it brings you to tears to think this is what it feels like when I'm ashamed, I'm embarrassed, with great regret, for somebody to reflect that or to convince me that's I'm in the wrong place. I'm doing the wrong thing, and So it's that shame of being found out by somebody you care, that wants you to do better and is calling you out. So I don't know that I've contributed anything, but I thought it was really special to get all three in that order. The order was perfect for me. And so going back to your question, Marty, does it have an impact? Does it change? Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I still have hope. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'll just to be short. Rom1 did his dissertation on the Cynic Stoic diatribe as the background for understanding Paul. And it strikes me that it was a performance tradition. He didn't approach it that way. But study of the Cynic Stoic diatribe and its effect in its culture, I think, would help us in relation to understanding some of the dynamics of what Paul is doing.
Yeah.
But it would be interesting to do a performance of one of the Cynic Stoic diatribes and to see, what is the relationship, to hear the relationship between that tradition, which was very widespread, it was very popular. It was kind of like street corner preachers or one who continues to get himself on TV in various rallies in Arizona, of a perpetual dialogue that some people find highly entertaining.
I think that's very helpful. That relates to the comment I was going to make. I mean, that is the diatribe is a performative piece, and so to maybe looking at some other diatribes and experimenting with performing those might enlighten what's happening in Romans. But the thing that I was going to comment on that's related to that is the choices that are offered there with the pronouns. It seems like in Romans 1 and 2, one would be to largely disregard them with your audience, right? So that you're not making any distinction in your audience between the we and the you, right? You're not identifying certain parts of the audience as Gentile, certain parts of the audience as Jewish or want to be Jewish. And Jim's modeled that for me. Jim kind of looked around at the audience in a more or less indiscriminate way, right? It wasn't like you identified one side of the room as being Jewish and one side of the room as being Gentile, which would be a temptation and one way to do it.
Well, I did look at Tracy more often.
Well, I was wise. I know that. I was wise, so I appreciated that. Yeah.
So, and I think some of us spoke to the way. No, that's right. Some of us spoke to the way that kind of was disorienting. Like we couldn't figure out where we fit or what our identity was, which actually could be a strategy, right? Like that's an intentional choice you can make. Or you could like single out people in the audience. And again, I think this is part what letters invite us to do, in particular when we're tellers, right? The audience is engaged in a different way than with narrative. And so you could identify certain groups, right? And look, and that would kind of highlight the concrete nature of what you're talking about, I think, Phil. And then I think Marty, of course, offered a third way, and this may be the way of the diatribe, and that is the you was not a real person. It was an imaginary person, right, that you were having a conversation with. That seems like a third option, at least, when you're trying to think what to do with the pronouns, right? Ignore them and kind of mix everybody all together, single out concrete parts of your audiences, or create an imaginary dialogue partner. And I think we saw at least the first and last. I don't think anybody did the second, where you identified Jews and Gentiles and looked at them when you were speaking to them.
Nathan?
I'm not sure if this is helpful or not, but in some of my work, it's sort of similar to performance criticism, where we're in the area of translation, where we always think that a lot of people think that translation is always just a good, no matter what, and one of the works is like, so, and I'm thinking of what Tom was saying, earlier about, in the United Methodist Church, and some of the other comments as well. Just is what we're doing in performing Romans 1 or 2 in a context in our contemporary audience where we're working for social healing. I've looked at some particular African traditions where they kind of were able to consume the colonial bomb, is what the term is, but do it in a way that was able to bring healing. They were, you know, they had their fingers on that pulse, and maybe Kathy was doing a little bit of that. We were all of a sudden sensing we wanted to maybe be okay with Paul all of a sudden. I think some of the challenges, and this is getting to the ancient world kind of stuff, I'm not always sure whether what Paul was doing enough to tell is, you know, is he working social healing here or not? Is Paul too ambiguous? And I don't know. One of the books we've read in our book club was by Emmy Keegler, and she talks about is it natural for me, if my natural inclinations as a woman to love another woman, is that am I exchanging natural for unnatural to be forced to try to love a man? I thought it was a wonderful take. I don't know that that's what Paul's going for, but it brought some healing to the group that we were reading the book with.
Richard.
Just two things quickly. The matter of women exchanging what is natural. I forget who the writer was, but it was in a book of essays gathered by Robert Brawley. Noted that phrase is used contemporarily in the ancient world to describe women who wanted to be on top during heterosexual intercourse. So just saying that's about patriarchy more than it is about attractional patterns or nature. But the thing that I'm finding interesting is the passage that this little chunk that we've done has its heart in the kindness of God. That's the word in the translations. The word is Christos. And I was wondering how we all might translate that, because that's a fun word. It means kind, serviceable, and actually I'm kind of liking serviceable, because over against religious enthusiasm, Paul is emphasizing, here's what we know about God. God makes it work. And that's the serviceability of God. God's aim is to embrace human being, and God's aim is to embrace creation. And so God does that through God's Christos, his character as being Christos. I don't know for sure how to do that. There are still pieces here that just plain piss me off. That's always going to be true. But the notion that this is, that this urges a serviceable notion of religion over against religious rigidity is one that sings to me most.
I'm still thinking about this idea from Nathan of taking a colonial bomb and trying to make something good out of it, social healing, bring social healing out of it. And it just reminds me of a proverb I've seen connected to Mexico, but I'm not sure exactly where it comes from, but it says, you know, they tried to bury us, they didn't know we were seeds, right? That's what that made me think of. And I just like that idea of, I'm thinking, is Paul recoverable? That's where I'm at personally. Or is Paul recoverable in some way that can bring healing? Maybe in ways that we don't really think of. There was a couple of chats. Just Mark said it'd be interesting to have a performance with an angry Paul blasting away at everyone. Indeed.
I can manufacture that. It'll take me 2 days, but I can do it.
And then Richard said that twist in Paul is why the sucker punch is important to me. He's drawing out the people who think that religious observance is about being right.
So we had thought we might get to do a little provoking. That's not going to happen in this session because we have 3 minutes left. Oh, sorry. This is my last little diatribe, so we should be We have 2 minutes left now in the session, so but we had the mini epic and 2 tellings. In the evening, we'll have 3 shorter tellings. They're not short by any means, but three tellings, more time after the tellings to discuss. And so Richard will just keep a pin in it. And if there's something he wants to pursue, those who told this now should know that it might come back to haunt you later on tonight. So you should have your pages near you to refresh if he calls upon you. And we understand that he asks you to do weird things. And so it's not, you may have to have your papers in your hands because it's tricky to do. We knew with Zoom and everything, we needed to have more downtime. And so we have a 3-hour break now, and then we'll come back. If you can be here right at 7 o'clock, that's really good because it's tricky if you're not. And for the storyteller. So thank you to everybody who put themselves out there in this session. The conversation will continue. So have a nice break. Bye, y'all.
I have a copy of the scholar's version that you can read and look at. I'll just leave it here on the table.
Okay. And I forgot to say to everyone, but we have this recorded too. But if there's somebody who doesn't feel comfortable with it being out there, they should let me know. Or I can always edit out. Like if somebody's like, I feel comfortable with what everyone else said, but not with what I said. That's fine too.
Are you speaking for a friend?
Open.
It should be on.
It's